Hare Krishna devotees, welcome to day 8 of our Bhakti Vaibhava seminar on Srimad Bhagavatam, third canto, day 8, and today we are beginning the fourth chapter of the third canto of Srimad Bhagavatam. First of all, let's begin with our prayers. Nama Om Vishnupadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimati Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pastya Deshatarne Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivas Adi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vanchakapatarubhyas cha kripas sindhubhya eva cha paditanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Right, very good. So, Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 4, titled Vidura Approaches Maitreya. And we have 5 sections. First section is continuing on actually from the end of the third chapter. The last section of the third chapter was part 1 of the disappearance of Lord Krishna. And now at the beginning of the fourth chapter, that's discussed further. The disappearance of Lord Krishna is discussed further, so it's the disappearance of Lord Krishna part 2, and it's from verse 1 to verse 13. Then the second section is verse 14 to verse 22, and that is Uddhava speaks with the Lord. Uddhava speaks with the Lord, verse 14 to verse 22. Then the third section is verse 23 to verse 27, and we call this Vidura questions Uddhava, who then departs. Vidura questions Uddhava, who then departs. Verse 23 to verse 27. Then the fourth section, verse 28 to verse 34. Krishna instructs Uddhava before departing. Krishna instructs Uddhava before departing. Verse 28 to verse 34. And the fifth and last section is from verse 35. It's verse 35 and verse 36, just 2 verses. Vidura meets Maitreya. Vidura meets Maitreya, which is then going to go on for quite a number of chapters, Vidura and Maitreya discussing, but first of all they meet in verses 35 and 36 of chapter 4 of the third canto. All right, so first of all then, let us read the verses of, verse 1 to verse 13, regarding the disappearance of Lord Krishna, part 2. So verse 1, thereafter all of them, the descendants of Vrishni and Bhoja, being permitted by the Brahmins, partook of the remnants of prasad, and also drank liquor made of rice. By drinking they all became delirious, and, bereft of knowledge, they touched the cores of each other's hearts with harsh words. Verse 2, as by the friction of bamboos, destruction takes place, so also at sunset, by the interaction of the faults of intoxication, all their minds became unbalanced, and destruction took place. Verse 3, the personality of Godhead Lord Sri Krishna, after foreseeing the end of his family by his internal potency, went to the bank of the river Saraswati, sipped water, and sat down underneath a tree. Verse 4, the Lord is the vanquisher of the distresses of one who is surrendered unto him. Thus he who desired to destroy his family told me previously to go to Badrik Ashram. 5. Yet in spite of my knowing his desire to destroy the dynasty, O Arindama Vidura, I followed him because it was impossible for me to bear separation from the lotus feet of the Master. 6. Thus following, I saw my patron and Master, Lord Sri Krishna, sitting alone and deeply thinking, taking shelter on the bank of the river Saraswati, although he is the shelter of the goddess of fortune. 7. The Lord's body is blackish, but is eternal, full of bliss and knowledge, and very, very beautiful. His eyes are always peaceful, and they're reddish like the rising morning sun. I could immediately recognize him as the Supreme Personality of Godhead by his 4 hands, different symbolic representations, and yellow silk garments. 8. The Lord was sitting, taking rest, against a young banyan tree, with his right lotus foot on his left thigh. And although he had left all household comforts, he looked quite cheerful in that posture. 9. At that time, after traveling in many parts of the world, Maitreya, a great devotee of the Lord, and a friend and well-wisher of the great sage, Krishna Dwaipayan Vyas, reached that spot out of his own perfect accord. Verse 10, Maitreya Muni was greatly attached to him, the Lord, and he was listening in a pleasing attitude, with his shoulder lowered. With a smile and a particular glance upon me, having allowed me to rest, the Lord spoke as follows. 11. O Vasu, I know from within your mind what you desired in the days of yore, when the Vasus and other demigods responsible for expanding the universal affairs performed sacrifices. You particularly desired to achieve my association. This is very difficult to obtain for others, but I award it unto you. 12. O honest one, your present life is the last and the supermost, because in this term of life you've been awarded my ultimate favor. Now you can go to my transcendental abode, Vaikuntha, by leaving this universe of conditioned living entities. Your visit to me in this lonely place, because of your pure and unflinching devotional service, is a great boon for you. 13. O Uddhava, in the lotus millennium, in the days of yore, at the beginning of the creation, I spoke unto Brahma, who is situated on the lotus that grows out of my navel, about my transcendental glories, which the great sages describe as Srimad Bhagavatam. Right, so let's go through this section with the purports. So it's the section's titled The Disappearance of Lord Krishna, Part 2, verse 1 to verse 13. So here's verse 1 again. Thereafter all of them, the descendants of Vrishni and Bhoja, being permitted by the Brahmins, partook of the remnants of prasad, and also drank liquor made of rice. By drinking, they all became delirious, and, bereft of knowledge, they touched the cause of each other's hearts with harsh words. So Prabhupada explains, when there's a ceremony in which Brahmins and devotees are nicely fed, the host takes their remnants with permission of those guests. Yeah. So after the very Krishna conscious situation there at Prabhas, the Vrishnis and Bhojas then took permission from the Brahmins and ate. Yes. So Prabhupada explains Kshatriyas can sometimes drink liquor. So they drank a light liquor from rice. But then they became delirious and lost their senses. And then they used harsh words which offended each other. And, elsewhere it's pointed out that and I think we mentioned yesterday, that those harsh words, they were all about what happened at the Battle of Kurukshetra, because many of Krishna's soldiers, his army, fought against the Pandavas, fought on behalf of Duryodhana and company, due to the special arrangement that was there. The special arrangement was that between Yudhisthira and Duryodhana, whichever of the two of them saw Krishna first the following day could decide whether he wanted Krishna's army who would fight, or whether he wanted just Krishna who would not fight. So as it happened, Maharaj Yudhisthira saw Krishna first. He got first choice, but to the great surprise of Duryodhana, he said, I'll just take Krishna without him fighting. So therefore the army of Krishna, or most of it, not actually all, but the great majority, fought on behalf of Duryodhana. And they fought, you could say, they fought against Krishna. Of course, Krishna was not fighting, but Krishna was on the other side, and as we all know very well, he was driving Arjuna's chariot and made different arrangements, although not fighting most of the time. So therefore, in this gathering then, those who fought with Krishna from his army, for example, Satyaki, who was the leader of Krishna's army, somehow or other he didn't go with the army and fight on the other side. He stayed on Krishna's side. And there were a few others also. So they started mocking those soldiers who had fought against the Lord. And they're drunk. And, when people get intoxicated, they say all sorts of crazy things. So they used harsh words. And in this way they offended each other. So Prabhupada makes the point that drinking liquor is extremely harmful. It's just extremely harmful, because even people, even cultured people, if somehow or other they end up drinking liquor, then they just lose their intelligence, lose their culture, and forget their good sense, and they can say and even do all sorts of nonsense things. So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the descendants of Vrishni and Bhoja were not expected to forget themselves in this way, but by the will of the Supreme it happened, and thus they became harsh towards one another. And, they're all Kshatriyas, and if anyone becomes harsh with a Kshatriya, like challenging or belittling, then the Kshatriya takes action. Kshatriya doesn't just forgive and forget. Okay, verse 2. As by the friction of bamboos, destruction takes place, so also at sunset, by the interaction of the faults of intoxication, all their minds became unbalanced and destruction took place. Okay, there's a short paragraph here, and Prabhupada explains that sometimes in a forest, fire just starts from friction, the friction of bamboos, by the will of the Lord. So similarly, the Yadus were destroyed by the will of the Lord, by the process of self-destruction. So, as there's no possibility of fire starting deep in the forest, so no power in the universe could vanquish the Yadus, because they are protected by Krishna. Yeah. But Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the Lord wanted them to be so destroyed, and thus they obeyed his order, as indicated by the word tad anugyata from the previous verse. So, verse 3, the personality of Godhead Lord Sri Krishna, after foreseeing the end of his family by his internal potency, went to the bank of the river Saraswati, sipped water, and sat down underneath a tree. So Prabhupada, giving emphasis to what's stated in the verse itself, says that all of these activities mentioned of the Yadus and Bhojas were executed by the internal energy of the Lord, because Krishna wanted them to go to their respective abodes, not where they were living here, but in the spiritual world. He wanted them to go back to where they had come from, generally from Vaikuntha, after his mission was completed. So they were all his sons and grandsons. So he protected them in a paternal way, in a fatherly way. And the question is put, how could they be vanquished in the presence of the Lord? But the question is answered in this verse, that everything was done by the Lord himself. Swatma Mayaya. So his family members were either plenary expansions of either his own plenary expansions or demigods. Yes. Or demigods. So he had separated them out from others. Yeah. He took them down to Prabhas, whereas others stayed in Dwaraka. So they drank and drank, took food and drink to their heart's content, but then by the arrangement of the Lord, they were sent back to their abodes, so that everyone could see that the powerful Yadu dynasty was no longer on earth. This word anugyata indicates it was all arranged from the previous verse. It was all arranged by the Lord. So these pastimes then, they seem like very extraordinary, but they're not manifestations of the external energy. They're manifestations of the internal energy. And within the internal energy, everything's eternal. So they didn't die. Prabhupada says, one should not conclude that the Yadus and Bhojas died in a drunken state in an ordinary fratricidal war. And Prabhupada makes an interesting little comment there that Jiva Goswami comments that these incidents were magical performances. Verse 4, the Lord is the vanquisher of the distresses of one who has surrendered unto him. Thus, he who desired to destroy his family told me previously to go to Badrik Ashram. So, while Uddhava, because this is all Uddhava speaking, while he had been in Dwaraka, Uddhava was warned that this was going to happen. And he was advised to get out, to go to Badrik Ashram, to get away so he wouldn't get caught up in this whole amazing situation of destruction of so many personalities. So he was advised to go to Badrik Ashram to associate with the devotees of Naranarayan. And in this way, in their association, increases eagerness for chanting, for hearing, for knowledge and detachment. Okay, so on to verse 5. Yet in spite of my knowing his desire to destroy the dynasty, O Arindama Vidura, I followed him, because it was impossible for me to bear separation from the lotus feet of the Master. So, he didn't, at this point at least, he didn't immediately go off to Badrik Ashram. So there's no purport to verse 5. Let's go on to verse 6. Thus following, I saw my patron and master, Lord Sri Krishna, sitting alone and deeply thinking, taking shelter on the bank of the river Saraswati, although he is the shelter of the goddess of fortune. So, Srila Prabhupada makes the point that sannyasis, those in the renounced order, often take shelter under a tree. And Uddhava found the Lord like this, like someone who didn't have a shelter. He's the proprietor. The Lord, of course, is the proprietor of everything. So everything is his shelter, and everything is under his shelter. Srila Prabhupada explains. So there's nothing astonishing in his taking shelter like a sannyasi. So on we go to verse 7. It's another verse for which there's no purport, so we'll go on to 8 after that. 7. The Lord's body is blackish, but is eternal, full of bliss and knowledge, and very, very beautiful. His eyes are always peaceful, and they're reddish like the rising morning sun. I could immediately recognize him as the Supreme Personality of Godhead by his 4 hands, different symbolic representations, and yellow silk garments. 8. The Lord was sitting, taking rest against a young banyan tree, with his right lotus foot on his left thigh. And although he had left all household comforts, he looked quite cheerful in that posture. So, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains that, according to Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, the Lord's sitting position, keeping his back against the newly grown banyan tree, is also meaningful, because the Ashvata, the banyan, has that name because it doesn't die quickly, but continues to live for many, many years. So anyway, Krishna's legs and their energies are the material ingredients: earth, water, fire, air, ether, earth, water, fire, air, and ether, or sky. Yeah, they represent the banyan. Yes, those elements represent the banyan, which is a product of material potency, and are therefore kept to his back, not in his front. And so, in other words, it's referring to this universe. But because this universe is one of the smallest of the universes, so the banyan is described as small, like a child, just a child banyan. Tyakta pipalam, it's a word in the verse, indicates his pastime, that his pastimes were now finished in this small universe. But of course, since there's no difference between his leaving or accepting something, since he's absolute and eternally blissful, there's no difference between him leaving or accepting something. So he was now prepared. He was now prepared to leave this universe and to go to another, just like the sun rising on one planet and setting on another simultaneously, although it doesn't change its situation. That's interesting, isn't it? The sun is rising somewhere and setting somewhere else, but actually the sun is in the same position. Verse 9, at that time, after traveling in many parts of the world, Maitreya, a great devotee of the Lord, and a friend and well-wisher of the great sage Krishna Dwaipayan Vyas, reached that spot out of his own perfect accord. Yes, Srila Prabhupada explains, Maitreya was a disciple of Parashara, who was the father of Vyasadeva. So therefore, Vyasadeva and Maitreya were friends and mutual well-wishers, you could say. So Srila Prabhupada makes the point in the purport, by some fortunate accident, Maitreya reached the place where Lord Sri Krishna was resting. And of course, to meet the Lord is not just some ordinary incident. Then Srila Prabhupada makes a really interesting and important statement about Maitreya. Yeah, this is really quite something. Maitreya was a great sage and a learned scholar philosopher, but not a pure devotee of the Lord. And therefore his meeting with the Lord there at that time may have been due to a Gyata Sukriti, some unknown devotional service performed without the performer's knowledge that it really is devotional service. The pure devotees, of course, they're always engaged in pure devotional service. So for them, meeting with the Lord is natural. But still, when it comes to those who are not up to that standard, it is somehow due to the unforeseen fortune of accidental devotional service. So, hearing that, we should not underestimate Maitreya. He's not a pure devotee, so what's he doing instructing Vidura? Vidura, who is such a great transcendental personality. But Maitreya, well, as we'll see, he was actually greatly attached to the Lord. He met the Lord somehow by some special arrangement. He was greatly attached to the Lord, and he listened very carefully to the Lord. So like this, Maitreya made some advancement. So, verse 10, Maitreya Muni was greatly attached to him, the Lord, and he was listening in a pleasing attitude, with his shoulder lowered, with a smile and a particular glance upon me being Uddhava. Having allowed me to rest, the Lord spoke as follows. So, both Uddhava and Maitreya are great souls. Like I said, we shouldn't underestimate Maitreya. But still the Lord's attention was more on Uddhava, because Uddhava is a pure devotee. He's not just a pure devotee, he's a very special pure devotee. All devotees, pure devotees, are special, but he's also particularly special because of his very close association with Lord Krishna. So, right. So he is referred to here as Maitreya is referred to as a Jnana Bhakta. Somehow there's some mixture with the monistic viewpoint. He's a devotee, but he's a mixed devotee. And generally, of course, not just generally, but always, the Lord reciprocates with devotees on the basis of love and not on the basis of philosophical knowledge, and certainly not on the basis of fruitive activities. In devotional service, there's no place for monistic knowledge or fruitive activities. There's just no place in the loving service of the Lord. And Prabhupada gives the example of the gopis. They were neither scholars nor mystics. They were spontaneous lovers of the Lord. But still, even though some might say they were lacking knowledge or something like that, still Lord Chaitanya approved. Lord Chaitanya said there the gopis' relationships with Krishna were supreme. And Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, herein the Lord's attitude towards Uddhava was more intimate than with Maitreya Muni. Yes. So, on to verse 11. O Vasu, I know from within your mind what you desired in the days of yore, when the Vasus and other demigods responsible for expanding the universal affairs performed sacrifices. You particularly desired to achieve my association. This is very difficult to obtain for others, but I award it unto you. So this is really a wonderful exchange between the Lord and Uddhava. Prabhupada begins the purport by saying Uddhava is one of the eternal associates of the Lord, and a plenary portion of Uddhava was one of the 8 Vasus in the days of yore. So what is this days of yore? It's a sort of slightly exotic, and even you could say arguably slightly archaic English term, the days of yore. It just means a long time ago, really a long time ago. Yeah. I mean, important days, but important days from a long time ago. So back at that time, the 8 Vasus and some demigods they performed a sacrifice to fulfill their goals of life, whatever their respective goals of life may have been. So at that time, an expansion of Uddhava, acting as one of the Vasus, desired to become an associate of the Lord. And of course, the Lord, as the Supersoul, he knew this. So Prabhupada makes the point that generally we forget incidents from our previous lifetimes, but the Lord as Supersoul, as superconsciousness, is within our hearts, and he reminds us to act in terms of our past knowledge. And Prabhupada refers to and quotes, not completely quotes, but partially quotes 2 verses to this effect in different ways. First of all, Bhagavad Gita chapter 4 verse 11, then Bhagavad Gita chapter 15 verse 15. So then Prabhupada goes on into the second paragraph. Everyone can desire whatever they like. They can desire. But the Lord fulfills. Man proposes, God disposes. So the thing here in this situation is that generally people don't know that the association of the Lord is the greatest thing, particularly the philosophical speculators who are more like impersonalists and just the gross fruit of workers. They don't know this. So the Lord here assured Uddhava he would fulfill his desire to get the association of the Lord. So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, it appears that when the Lord informed him by his indication to Uddhava, the great sage Maitreya finally became aware of the importance of entering into the association of the Lord. Now that's an important point, because we just read how Maitreya is just not on the same level as the pure devotees. He's influenced by some impersonalism, it seems, to some degree, maybe some fruit of activities to some degree. Even though he has, he knows about the Lord and he has respect for the Lord, but he's not a surrendered devotee. But now, being in the association of the Lord, who's speaking to Uddhava, so Maitreya finally became aware that when you're in the association of the Lord, it's really, really significant. Okay, so on to verse 12. O honest one, your present life is the last and the supermost, because in this term of life you've been awarded my ultimate favor. Now you can go to my transcendental abode, Vaikuntha, by leaving this universe of conditioned living entities. Your visit to me in this lonely place, because of your pure and unflinching devotional service, is a great boon for you. Prabhupada explains, when someone's fully conversant with knowledge of the Lord, as far as is possible for a living entity, a perfect, liberated living entity, then he can enter the spiritual world. So at this time, though, the Lord was sitting in a lonely place, just about to leave this world. And Uddhava fortunately saw him and got permission to enter Vaikuntha. So, of course, the Lord's everywhere, and his appearance and disappearance are merely experience of the inhabitants of particular universes. And Prabhupada gives an example he just gave, actually, a few verses ago. Just like the sun, it doesn't appear and disappear. It may seem like that it appears in the morning and disappears in the evening, and then we're plunged into darkness. But it's just the experience of people, circumstantial experience, that it rises in the morning and sets at night. So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, the Lord is simultaneously both in Vaikuntha and everything and everywhere within and without Vaikuntha. That's interesting, isn't it? So verse 13, O Uddhava, in the lotus millennium, in the days of yore, at the beginning of the creation, I spoke unto Brahma, who is situated on the lotus that grows out of my navel. So he spoke to Brahma, Uddhava, or Krishna. Krishna spoke to Brahma about his transcendental glories, which the great sages describe as Srimad Bhagavatam. So in the purport, Prabhupada points out a very important point, that this is a clarification of the explanation the Lord gave Lord Brahma in the second canto. Yeah, that means basically those 4 verses, or plus a few verses around the 4, but the 4 are the essence, really. The Lord gave Brahma. The Lord said that the concise form of Srimad Bhagavatam was meant just to elucidate his personality, not for helping us materially. So any attempt at explaining these 4 verses in impersonal ways is nullified here, completely nullified by this verse. And Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, Sridhar Swami also explains in this connection that the same concise form of the Bhagavatam concerned the pastimes of Lord Krishna and was never meant for impersonal indulgence. That's significant, isn't it? Yeah. Same concise form means the Bhagavatam in 4 verses. Yeah, Chatushloki Bhagavatam. Right, so on to verses, onto the second section, second section. Uddhava speaks with the Lord. And this is from verse 14 to verse 22. We are making progress here. Let's see how it goes. So anyway, let's read the verses. Verse 14. Uddhava said, O Vidura, when I was thus favored at every moment by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and addressed by him with great affection, my words failed in tears, and the hairs on my body erupted. After smearing my tears, I, with folded hands, spoke like this. 15. O my Lord, devotees who engage in the transcendental loving service of your lotus feet have no difficulty in achieving anything within the realm of the four principles of religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation. But, O Great One, as far as I'm concerned, I've preferred only to engage in the loving service of your lotus feet. Some of the devotees want some other things, mixed devotees, but pure devotees, like Uddhava, only want to serve the Lord's lotus feet. Verse 16. My Lord, even the learned sages become disturbed in their intelligence when they see that your greatness engages in fruitive work, although you are free from all desires. That you take birth, although you're unborn. That you flee out of fear of the enemy and take shelter in a fort, although you are the controller of invincible time. And that you enjoy householder life surrounded by many women, although you enjoy in yourself. 17. O my Lord, your eternal self is never divided by the influence of time, and there's no limitation to your perfect knowledge. Thus you are sufficiently able to consult with yourself, yet you called upon me for consultation as if bewildered, although you are never bewildered, and this act of yours bewilders me. 18. My Lord, kindly explain to us, if you think us competent to receive it, that transcendental knowledge which gives enlightenment about yourself, and which you explained before to Brahmaji. 19. When I thus expressed my heartfelt desires unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the lotus-eyed Lord instructed me about his transcendental situation. Verse 20. I've studied the path of understanding self-knowledge from my spiritual master, the Personality of Godhead, and thus after circumambulating him, I've come to this place very much aggrieved due to separation. 21. My dear Vidura, now I am mad for want of the pleasure of seeing him, and just to mitigate this, I'm now proceeding to Badrik Ashram in the Himalayas for association, as I have been instructed by him. 22. There, in Badrik Ashram, the Personality of Godhead, in his incarnation as the sages Nara and Narayan, has been undergoing great penance since time immemorial for the welfare of all amiable living entities. Let us go back and go through the section again. 14 to 22. Uddhava speaks with the Lord, and we'll go into the purports also. So verse 14. Uddhava said, O Vidura, when I was thus favored at every moment by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and addressed by him with great affection, my words failed in tears, and the hairs on my body erupted. After smearing my tears, I, with folded hands, spoke like this. So, here is now, verse 15, Uddhava is now speaking to the Lord. O my Lord, devotees who engage in the transcendental loving service of your lotus feet have no difficulty in achieving anything within the realm of the four principles of religiosity, economic development, sense gratification, and liberation. But, O Great One, as far as I'm concerned, I have preferred only to engage in the loving service of your lotus feet. All right, so there's a purport here. Prabhupada begins that the associates of the Lord in Vaikuntha, they have Sarupya Mukti, one of the 5 types of liberations. Yes, bodily features like the Lord. They appear to be the same as the Lord. So yeah, this is Sarupya Mukti. And one other of those 5 muktis is Sayuja Mukti, meaning to merge, but the devotees never accept that Sayuja Mukti, merging into the Brahmajyoti of the effulgence of the Lord. But Prabhupada makes the point that actually the devotees achieve not only liberation, but any success in the realm of religiosity, economic development, or sense gratification, up to the standards of the demigods. But a pure devotee like Uddhava refuses to accept these things. So Srila Prabhupada concludes the purport by saying, a pure devotee wants simply to engage in the service of the Lord and does not consider his own personal benefit. Okay, so let's go on to verse 16. It's got a fairly extensive purport. We've got 6 minutes. Let's see how we do. So verse 16, my Lord, even the learned sages become disturbed in their intelligence when they see that your greatness engages in fruitive work, although you're free from all desires, that you take birth, although you're unborn, that you flee out of fear of the enemy and take shelter in a fort, although you are the controller of invincible time, and that you enjoy householder life surrounded by many women, although you enjoy in yourself. Sure, this is very profound, isn't it? So let's go through the purport. Pure devotees, Prabhupada discusses pure devotees, not concerned with philosophical speculation regarding transcendental knowledge of the Lord, because it's not possible to completely know him. But whatever little knowledge the devotees have of him by his mercy is sufficient, because they're satisfied just hearing and chanting about him and about his pastimes. Some of the pastimes, as mentioned, seem contradictory even to pure devotees, so therefore Uddhava is asking Krishna about them, like he's got nothing to do even in the creation and sustenance of the material world. So therefore it seems contradictory that he lifts Govardhan Hill to protect his devotees. Prabhupada concludes the first paragraph by saying, the Lord is the supreme Brahman, the absolute truth, the personality of Godhead appearing like a man. But Uddhava had doubts whether he, the Lord, could have so many transcendental activities. Second paragraph. In one sense, of course, there's no difference between Krishna and the impersonal Brahman. So how can he have so many things to do, whereas Brahman has nothing to do, either materially or spiritually? It's just there. So if he's unborn, how could he be born as the son of Vasudeva and Devaki? If he's fearful to time is afraid of him. Time, the supreme fear, is afraid of him. How could he be afraid to fight with Jarasandha and take shelter within a fort, means at Dwaraka? How can one who's full in himself take pleasure in family members, children, etc.? So Prabhupada makes the point, all these apparently contradictory happenings bewilder even great scholars. So they can't understand whether inactivity is a fact or whether his activities are only imitations, Prabhupada says. And the last paragraph, here's the solution. The solution is he has nothing to do with anything mundane. His activities are transcendental. Of course, this cannot be understood by the mundane speculators, and they become bewildered by these contradictions or apparent contradictions. But for the transcendental devotees, there's nothing astonishing in these things, but rather they feel excited and enlivened when the Lord, by something like, he's unborn, but he takes birth from Devaki. For the devotees, this is not confusing, it's glorious, inspiring. So, of course, the impersonalists think that the Brahman conception of the absolute truth is just a negation of all mundane activities. But they don't know that Para-Brahman, the Supreme Brahman, is full of transcendental activities. So then, the real transcendentalist is one who knows the distinction between the conception of Brahman and the conception of the Supreme Brahman, Para-Brahman. Yes, such a transcendentalist is not bewildered. And therefore Krishna also says in Bhagavad Gita chapter 10, verse 2, even the great sages and demigods can know hardly anything about my activities and transcendental potencies. So Srila Prabhupada says that Grandfather Bhishma gives the right explanation of the Lord's activities in the verse, the Sanskrit of which is quoted here, 1st Canto chapter 9, verse 16. And just to help us, I took the translation out. 1916 translation. O King, no one can know the plan of the Lord Sri Krishna. Even though great philosophers inquire exhaustively, they are bewildered. So we will carry on from here tomorrow. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai.